Dobrodošli u novo izdanje podcasta Mrežnica. I dok se u Hrvatskoj skupljaju i analiziraju još uvijek rezultati predsjedničkih izbora, prava zvijezda godine na svjetskoj razini uskoro stupa na scenu. Pogađate, on je Donald Trump i kroz nekoliko dana zasjest će u Bijelu kuću. Što će Trumpov dolazak značiti za Sjedinjene Američke Države? Što za Europu, što za ostatak svijeta? Hoće li biti nastavljeni ratovi ili će doći možda do ekonomskog boljitka? O svemu tome razgovaramo s našim današnjim gostom. On je Larry C. Johnson. Američki bloger, politički komentator i bivši analitičar u Središnjoj obavještajnoj agenciji CIA. Johnson je u CIA radio 4 godine, a zatim je prešao u Ured za borbu protiv terorizma američkog State Departmenta. Prošle godine govorio je i u Ujedinjenim narodima, odnosno u Vijeću sigurnosti, oko okolnosti sabotaže Sjevernog toka. Neki će reći da ga ne vole niti lijevi, niti desni, što bi mogao biti dobar znak. Johnson je čest gost stranih podcasta, a danas je i gost podcasta Mrežnica. So, dear Mr. Johnson, I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us.
You're most welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. The world awaits the appointment of Donald Trump as the US president. So many questions remain open, from the war in Ukraine to the Middle East, the situation in Europe and the US itself. What do you think Mr. Trump's first move will be?
Well, we've already seen the first move in terms of the ceasefire announced today between Israel and Hamas. This would not have happened without Donald Trump's intervention. And again, it shows sort of the contradictory portrait of Donald Trump. On the one hand, he's seen as reflexively pro-Israeli, that he would be absolutely 100% on the side of the Zionists, Bibi Netanyahu and his crowd. Part of that was events because of his money he received from the widow of Sheldon Adelson, a wealthy billionaire. Well, that's I'm repeating myself. A billionaire in Las Vegas, Jewish, who reportedly gave up to $100 million. May have only been 50, but regardless, assumed that came with that money came with a obligation. Naming Marco Rubio to be Secretary of State. Against Rubio, seen as one of these, I'll call them Christian Zionists, avidly supporting Israel. Naming Steve Witkoff as a special envoy for the Middle East. So you had this picture that he's going to be entirely on the side of Israel. But then last week he posted on Truth Social a clip of Professor Jeffrey Sachs speaking to the Cambridge Union, in which he referred to Bibi Netanyahu as a deep, dark, and then referred to his mother and parentage in a very vulgar term, accurate but vulgar. Well, that was, clearly an affront to someone like Netanyahu, and it was Trump sending a message. Then we get reporting out of the Israeli media that the special envoy for the Middle East for Trump, Stephen Witkoff, who was assumed, because he is an Orthodox Jew, it was naturally assumed he'd be entirely on the side of Netanyahu, yet he called up Netanyahu, he got a hold of his staff and said, "I'm coming, I want a meeting Friday night." And Netanyahu's staff said, "Oh, no, it's Shabbat, it's Sabbath, we can't do it." And so Witkoff basically used some equally salty language and said he didn't give a damn and that Netanyahu better meet with him, and he did. And apparently it was not a pleasant system of a session of pleasantries. Witkoff made it very clear, you better have a ceasefire in place before Donald Trump is inaugurated or else. So, that's why now they've announced a ceasefire.
Okay.
And, Hamas is going to release up 30 hostages, and Israel is going to probably release around 2,000 prisoners. That means Israel's still holding over 8,000 Palestinians as hostages. There's no other way to view it. But, so Trump's already having an impact. And as he just put out on Truth Social a little bit ago, see, and I'm not even in the White House yet.
Trump has said many times that America is his top priority. It seems as if he is not interested in anything else, but is that true?
I think so. Let's put it this way. That's what he ran on. That's what he said. If he does not live up to that, then his presidency will be an abject failure. If he follows through on that promise, putting America first and the interests of the people of America first, I think actually he will become a historic president in a very good sense. But with Trump, you never know. He is a volatile personality. He's clearly, someone of incredible mental toughness, because to have endured the unrelenting legal attacks that he put up with over the last 4 years is really remarkable. I don't know too many people who would have been able to have withstood that and dealt with all the uncertainty. Anyone that's had a lawsuit filed against them, you always get a rock in the pit of your stomach, and there's fear, and you can never predict which way it's going to go. You don't have control of the situation. And yet Trump, in spite of all of that, prevailed. So I think if he continues to put America first and wars last, he'll be successful. If he doesn't, then he will have dug his own grave. Yeah.
So many expect the war in Ukraine to end once Trump takes office. Is that possible?
Well, it's going to end. Whether the United States has a say in that or not remains to be seen. Trump can end it right away if on day one he informs Volodymyr Zelensky, I'm cutting off all funding to you. There's no more aid coming. And I'm recalling U.S. military and intelligence personnel. We're done supporting you. If Trump did that, the war would end immediately. It would not be able to continue. I doubt he'll do that. Which means that Russia will continue to press forward with military advantage, and the United States has no leverage over Russia. They say, well, we'll lift sanctions. Russia goes, we don't care. We've lived more than 2 years now with sanctions, and we'll continue living with them. What we want, what Russia wants, is these Ukrainians no longer to be equipped with weapons that can attack Russian people, that the neo-Nazis that make up a significant political force in Ukraine be banned and eliminated from public office, they not be allowed, and that NATO stop providing weapons and conducting the military exercises in Ukraine, which also means pull back from our borders. That's what Russia wants. Whether NATO is willing to give that right now, I don't think so. But Russia is going to, I think, ultimately compel NATO to accept that kind of deal by inflicting a severe military defeat on Ukraine.
You mentioned Mr. Zelensky. What do you think will happen to Mr. Zelensky in the end?
He will either be killed in a coup launched by the military, or he will flee to a safe haven overseas. Now, this is one area there Donald Trump does have leverage. The Trump's negotiator can sit in front of Volodymyr Zelensky, hold up a passport and go, see this document? If you want to get into the United States, this is what you're going to do. If you refuse to negotiate, if you refuse to follow our guidance, you will not be welcome in the United States. I think that would have a lot of leverage over Zelensky. I don't see him, he's not the kind of person that's going to risk his survival by being stubborn.
After 3 years of conflict, how could we describe the war in Ukraine today? Whose success is it and whose failure? One thing is certain, the victims are the Ukrainian people whose country has been devastated.
Right.
Who are the biggest losers of this war?
Yeah, no, it's Ukraine and the Ukrainian men. The casualties are estimated for, on the Ukrainian side, well in excess of 1 million. The Russians have, by contrast, has suffered about 100,000 killed, probably 200,000 to 300,000 wounded. That's a significant number, but it's not a devastating number where what Ukraine is facing is as much as 60% of its military force has been put out of action, and they don't have a reserve to go to. So this war is moving entirely in the favor of Russia. Russia has the weapons, Ukraine doesn't. Russia has trained manpower, Ukraine doesn't. And Russia hasn't even mobilized on a war footing. Everything right now is being done under the auspices of what they call the special military operation.
Geopolitical events in the world have been quite hectic lately. Europe is shaking, governments are falling.
Yeah.
Has Trump already shaken Europe with his friend Elon Musk?
Yes, to an extent. Of course, a lot of it's self-inflicted in the part of Europe. I mean, take Germany as an example. German Chancellor Scholz stood by and said nothing, did nothing, as the United States destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, which really plunged Germany into economic chaos and decline. They didn't even speak up to defend himself. It's like a man allowing some other man to, rape his wife or girlfriend. I mean, sorry to use such a crude analogy, but that's exactly what it was. It was that brutal to Germany, to the German people. Their industry is in collapse right now. And despite constant claims from the likes of Joe Biden and the new Secretary General of NATO, Rutte, that NATO is as strong as ever. We're totally united. Oh, wait a second. Go talk to Hungary. Go talk to the new Prime Minister of Croatia. Go talk to Robert Fico in Slovakia. New president.
New president, yes.
Yeah,
Mr.
the new president in
Milanovic.
Croatia. Yes. And then in Romania, the Romanian people have taken to the streets. They're going to elect somebody who will reject the NATO position, which is, really critical from a NATO standpoint, because at this point, Romania is supposed to host the largest base in NATO inside Romania. The government of Austria also has decidedly shifted. They say it's shifted to the right, but now we're in this. I'm old enough to remember that back in the day in 1980, 40 years ago, 45 years ago, when we talked about right wing, we were talking about people who favored war, who favored aggressive foreign policy and military action. Now, here we are 45 years later, these actions are anti-war. These so-called right-wingers are against war and against increasing foreign entanglements. So, the world sort of flipped upside down. But the point of the fact is, there is not a single government in Europe, possibly with the exception of Meloni in Italy, where the current leader enjoys widespread support. Just the opposite. The current leaders enjoy very, very small and declining support. And at the same time, there is no single opposition party that has taken a majority view. Instead, you run, it's like I think with AfD in Germany as an example, they garner 30% of the vote. Well, that's a plurality, but that's not a majority. They don't have what Donald Trump has. Donald Trump won a majority of votes and a majority in the Electoral College. You don't have anybody like that in Europe right now, and that makes Europe even shakier, more susceptible to chaos.
Let's talk about NATO's push for increased military spending. Trump's proposal to increase defense spending is unattainable for many. Europe has not been at war for decades. As an expert, how would you assess Europe's military state? Is Europe weak or strong?
Have you ever known a recent college graduate, someone who's come out of university, and they've got a credit card, and they now owe $50,000 on that credit card, and they had a job that was paying them $15,000 a year, but now they've got to take a cut, and they're going to make $12,000 a year. And so the credit card company comes to them and says, "We want you to increase your payments." How are they going to increase their payments? They're making less money. Ditto for Europe. That's Europe. Europe has got a maxed out credit card and is having to work at cheaper rates. The economies cannot sustain 5% growth. Hell, they can't even sustain 2% growth. In fact, it's going to, in some nations, it will be even a question of whether they can continue any contribution to NATO. So what we're witnessing really is the collapse, the start of the collapse of NATO. NATO exists on paper. It's now more of a theoretical concept, but in terms of being a viable military force, it's not.
So is Europe already a victim of its own policies?
Yes, very much so. This is a self-inflicted wound. They've gone along entirely with what the United States wanted. Allowing to impose sanctions on Russia and to try to cut off the flow of cheap oil and natural gas from Russia doesn't hurt Russia. Russia's got other markets. They're, the Europeans need to look at a map and say, God, they're like 1.5 billion Indians, and there's 1.3 billion Chinese. There are maybe only 300 million of us total. Where's Russia can get rid of Europe as a market. It has effectively, and it's moved into India and China, and it will move into other countries in the global South. So this was a self-inflicted wound. The Europeans did not have the leverage, the control.
Yeah, but Europeans fear the outbreak of war. Some countries are preparing their citizens. Should Europe be worried about the conflict spreading?
It's not going to spread because Russia attacks them. It will only spread if they continue to provide weapons that are used to attack Russia. If you had a neighbor across the street from you that had a gun, but didn't own any of the ammunition, and a neighbor up the street was the one continuing bringing him ammunition to fire at your house, would you be mad just at the guy firing at you, or also at the neighbor up the street? You'd be upset with the neighbor up the street. That's what Europe is. Europe is a facilitator of violence, and Russia recognizes it. Russia is in a position that it could crush Europe if it wanted to. But that's not what the Russians want. The one thing the people of Europe need to understand is that Russia comprehends the costs of war far more than most Europeans. Now, admittedly, the French and Germans suffered terribly in World War II, but not on the scale that the Russians did. And that's made even the Russians more reluctant to go to war, to risk spreading war. If anything, Europe should be a natural ally with Russia, but instead they've chosen to be hostile.
So are dark times ahead?
Yes, I do believe so, particularly for Europe. Europe is not blessed with a quantity of natural resources. It has basically deindustrialized. It has surrendered in large measure to the green agenda, and in the green agenda, given up nuclear power plants, and opted for solar energy. Good in theory, but is terrible in practice. Doesn't really work. And then has opted for this hostility towards Russia. And, Russia's not looking for a fight, but if you provoke them, they will strike back. And they have the potential to do enormous damage to Europe. So it's there is no good news on the horizon economically or militarily.
Yeah, Europe is in an economic crisis. The reason for which is the halt in Russian gas supplies. We had sabotage of Nord Stream. The sabotage has already happened, and now the pipeline through Ukraine has also been cut off. You spoke at the United Nations Security Council about this sabotage. What do we know about it so far?
Well, I think Seymour Hersh, who I, full disclosure, is a good friend of mine. Oh, I've known him now for, oh Lord, almost 45 years. So he is a genuinely old friend. But no, he got the story right. It was a CIA operation carried out at the direction of the Biden White House. And it was done for one purpose: force the Europeans to buy U.S. natural gas. Make the United States wealthy again. It didn't matter if Europe got impoverished in the process. While it was a blow to Russia, it was not a devastating blow because Russia had alternatives in other markets. We have seen since then the actions of Volodymyr Zelensky and closing off in the oil shipments that were coming through Ukraine through the existing pipeline. And in cutting that off, again, it hurts Europe. It even hurts Ukraine. Ukraine was getting upwards of $1 billion a year just for letting the gas flow. And then just 3 days ago, Ukraine launched an attempted attack on the Turk Stream pipeline.
That's right.
So Zelensky's acting at the behest of the United States, I firmly believe. And this is what the United States is trying to do, is create complete energy dependence on the part of Russia, on the part of Europe, where they'll ignore Russia and then have to rely strictly upon the United States.
So will Europe become a victim of its trust in the US?
Well, I think it's already a victim of its trust.
Okay.
Yeah. So it has been, it's been victimized. It is Europe is behaving like an abused spouse, whose partner constantly beats them and abuses them and yells at them. And yet the person doesn't leave. They stay in that relationship. They take the abuse. I mean, really, it's sort of embarrassing to watch Europe behave in such a servile manner, to be nothing more than a toothless poodle attached to a U.S. leash. They do what the United States tells them to do.
So it means we need new leader. Who could become Europe's new leader?
I don't think there is anybody now that would pass muster. Europe is too deeply divided. If you look at what like in France, a conservative like Marine Le Pen, she won the plurality of the election, but the other parties, the minority parties, conspired and got enough cooperation between them to prevent her from taking office. I think you're going to see the same with Alice Weidel in Germany with the AfD. The kind of leader who, in theory, should speak, speaks best on behalf of European interests right now, I think, is Viktor Orban in Hungary. But, the rest, the Brits, the French, the Germans, the Dutch, the Danes, Norwegians, everybody rejects him. So there is no consensus. That's part of the problem. And I think it's only out of chaos that a possible new leadership will emerge.
Yeah, that's true. Let us shift back to the USA. Why does Trump want Greenland, and could he get it?
Yeah, I think, he's a real estate guy, likes to acquire real estate. But the only way he would get it would be to, quote, buy it from Denmark, and I don't think Denmark's selling. I think the most likely outcome is the people of Greenland will declare their own independence from Denmark and become their own territory, their own country. And then they'll negotiate a treaty with the United States. But here's the problem. Trump is asserting that he wants, Greenland because Greenland is a bridge to the Arctic and the perceived riches that are to be had in the Arctic. Well, the question is, how's the U.S. going to get there? Because they're not going to strap on snowshoes and walk across the ice. The United States right now has one ship that is an icebreaker. Only one. They used to have two. The other one caught on fire. Russia, by contrast, has 70 icebreakers. And of those 70, 7 of them are nuclear powered. Russia is already in the Arctic, has been in the Arctic, has a presence because it can sail there. It can put people on board ships and move there with no problem. The United States can't. The United States has no ability right now to project any kind of force or presence into the Arctic region. And even if they get special access to Greenland, everything they do is still going to have to be done from Greenland as a land base because the United States lacks the power to project any kind of force on the maritime front.
So there's talk about Canada too. What do Americans think about all these ideas?
Well, we've been invaded by, I live down in Florida, and every winter we get invaded by all the folks from Canada, particularly from Quebec, the Québécois, the ones that parlez-vous français. But taking on Canada, I'm not even sure, nobody's even thought through how that would work. If you bring in Canada as the 51st state, they only get 2 senators, and maybe each of the different provinces would give the different additional votes to the House of Representatives. Well, you're bringing in a country that's more likely to vote with the Democrats than with the Republicans. So that would be stupid on Trump's part to, bring in his own self-destruction from within. I think all of this was nothing more than just Donald Trump tweaking the nose of the Canadian leadership.
So he was trolling.
Yes,
he was trolling.
Absolutely.
Mr. Johnson, are Americans tired of wars?
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And that's where, Trump's rhetoric is, hey, I'm going to keep us out of needless wars. And yet they're talking about, go to war with China, go to war with Iran. I've said it before, and I will reiterate it, that if Donald Trump gets embroiled in wars, he will be destroying his presidency. If he goes through his term without embroiling the United States in another war and achieves peaceful relations with Russia and with China and with Iran, he will go down in history as maybe the greatest president ever. It's really in his hands, and he's got the control over it. Remains to be seen what he does.
Are warmongers still active? We all know that war is big business. So will the neocons calm down now? What about?
No, heavens no.
No.
The only way you have to calm them down is you get a tranquilizer dart and shoot them with it, put them to sleep. Otherwise, they're going to continue to agitate for war, expanding the war. They can't help themselves.
Okay, we talked about Israel 25 minutes ago, but what is next for the Middle East? Experts warn that Israel could attack Iran. How realistic is that?
I think it's growing less likely with each passing day. 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I thought it was highly likely. And it all rested upon Israel's assumption that Iran was weakened, dramatically weakened, had no air defense, and that they could easily attack and destroy their nuclear capability or facilities that are engaged with working on nuclear material. Well, 2 days from now, Russia is going to sign a security arrangement, a comprehensive security, strategic security deal with Iran that will encompass economic, political, as well as military cooperation. I don't know if it'll necessarily qualify as a mutual defense pact, but what it does mean is that they're putting down on paper Russia's commitment to help defend Iran and help Iran recover economically from what they view as illegal international sanctions, economic sanctions. The fact that Russia and China have been regularly conducting military exercises with Iran over the last 5 years is another consideration someone like Israel has to take into account, that if they're attacking Iran, are they also running the risk of widening the war to having to fight Russia and China? So I see with the entrance of Donald Trump, while there's clearly members in his administration or proposed nominees for the administration, that they'll be agitating to do something militarily about Iran. But, all of that talk, it's predicated on people who have never actually had to carry out those kinds of military operations. It is, all we have to do is look back at the bombings that the United States did in Iraq in 2003. We had complete control of the air. There was no air defense system threatening us. We could fly wherever we wanted, drop whatever we wanted, linger however long we wanted. Even with that, all of those advantages, we did not defeat Iraq on the ground. We had to put troops and tanks and armored personnel carriers to move forward. All of our bombing didn't destroy all of the capabilities of Iraq. So it is simply ludicrous and idiotic to think that the United States or Israel or both combined could launch any attack on Iran, which would devastate Iran to the point that it could not retaliate and could not inflict greater damage on both the United States and Israel.
Okay, and my final question, you hope Trump will make America great again and the rest of the world and Europe, what, poor?
No, listen.
No.
If making America great again means, in my mind, America staying home, minding its own damn business, and learning to be friends with others, learning to help promote their interests, not figure out how can we screw them out of something that we want? How can we take advantage of them? How can we rob them? Because right now, the United States is a bully. We demand that other countries do what we want. And yet if those other countries exacted a similar demand on us, we would be outraged.
Yeah.
So my idea of making America great again is, well, let's clean up our own mess at home. Let's take care of our problems of crummy, deteriorating infrastructure, homelessness, weak industrial output. Let's see if we can correct those. Fix. If you want to go lecture other people about becoming physically fit and leading a healthy lifestyle, you don't want to be the person that's drinking 2 bottles of Slivovitz and smoking cigars and overweight, okay?
Okay. Okay. You mentioned Slivovitz.
Yeah.
Obviously, for our rakia.
I've had a drink or two.
Oh, great. So, Mr. Johnson, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights.
Hey, well, thank you for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity, and good wishes to all.
Thank you. Thank you for your time once again. Wish you all the best.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks.